I'm Gwen Eiffel, and welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra. I'm joined around the table by Peter Baker of the New York Times, Ed O'Keefe of the Washington Post, Nancy Youssef of McClatchy Newspapers, and Doyle McManus of the Los Angeles Times. Every Friday afternoon, I call my panelists and ask them what they've been working on that we can discuss during the webcast. Today, Doyle here said to me what we've all been thinking. I don't have the bandwidth for anything else. Indeed, there's been so much going on this summer that we really do need the webcast to fit more of it in. Let's talk, for instance, about Syria, where the fighting rages on. Nancy, tell me, this week I hear 1,700 killed.
That's right. It was one of the deadliest weeks of the conflict. And what was interesting in terms of the developments there is ISIL, or the Islamic State, depending on which acronym you want to use, has now fighting Assad forces. Up until this point, it had been the Islamic State fighting other rebel forces and largely avoiding Assad's forces. They fought them in Raqqa, which is essentially the capital of their caliphate at this point, and drove them out. In the process, there were 270 civilians killed out of the 1,700 this week, making it one of the deadliest weeks of the conflict. And it suggested an ISIS that's been emboldened by its successes in Iraq, that it's going more on the offensive, that it has put down the rebel opposition that it's faced. And so it was a very game-changing week, if you will, because in addition to that, they took an oil field in central Syria, and there was suggestions that we now have an Islamic State that is very much on the offensive in Syria, even more so than it is in Iraq.
Peter, let me ask you a little bit about another one of these running themes that runs through every single story we touch, and that's Vladimir Putin. I was interested, slightly amused, I suppose, to read a press release from the Kremlin this week in which he called Benjamin Netanyahu and offered to broker peace for him, and I thought, wow, he's like, where's Waldo? He's in every story. Yeah. What is his interest in being in every venue?
Well, he's the Russian president. Why shouldn't he be? It's a great power. It's equal to the United States, and it should be a dominant and feared power on the world stage. He is involved in it. He's involved in Iraq, where the Iraqis are trying to get some more Russian help. He's involved in Syria, where he's been on the side of Assad the whole time. Obviously, the Ukraine situation.
The Iran nuclear talks.
The Iran nuclear talks. And you know what? This is what Putin wants. He wants to be a player. He wants to have Russia be a great power again, and he's showing it by being in having his hands in each and every pot.
When you were traveling in Germany, Doyle, I'm very curious about whether what we see at a distance, which is the incredible resentment in the wake of these NSA revelations, whether that's real on the ground there, whether that's what people are actually talking about there, or that's just a very high level, just the president and the politicians are talking about.
There's a little of each. It's clearly mostly among the foreign policy elites, the politicians. There is an amount of hurt that Germany thinks of itself, with justice, as the number one ally, the most important ally of the United States in Europe. It's the most important country in Europe, but it just don't get no respect. But it's also in the population as well, and it has become a domestic political issue, so that some of what we've seen over the last several weeks, including the expulsion of the CIA station chief, was really done for domestic political reasons, because Angela Merkel, the chancellor, couldn't be seen just trying to sweep over the whole thing. Now, there's one weird, we were talking earlier about the confluence, the way all of these different stories are crossing each other. Yeah. One weird, unexpected, and very small side effect of the shoot-down of the Malaysian airliner over Ukraine is that suddenly Germans and other Europeans are saying, you know, the CIA and the NSA aren't so bad after all. They keep coming up with all this interesting evidence of, satellite pictures.
Yeah, how do we happen to have all
intercepts.
That?
Gee, it's good to have them around.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to talk a little bit. You were talking about domestic issues. Well, we have them too. We have Congress, which is theoretically going away for the August recess next week. What do they have to get done between now and then?
Your congressional traffic report?
Yes.
Let's see. No pun intended, the highway bill up first. There's still some attempts to try to pass something that would be a stopgap basically through the spring to ensure that federal funding for big highway projects continues. The House has done it, Senate's supposed to try. The House might try to quickly pass it because you wouldn't want to screw up summer construction projects.
That's
and,
the kind of
tie up a
story
lot
that people
jobs.
will actually know if you don't do it.
Absolutely. All you have to do is drive down the street. The biggest outrage probably, and I think a lot of lawmakers are upset about this, is that they're still struggling to come up with an agreement on how to fix the Department of Veterans Affairs. For a while, this had been simmering under, a sort of in the background with all the other things going on, and this week it finally flared up. There was some disagreement between the Republicans and Democrats, House Republicans and the Senate Democrats, about how to pay for this whole thing. It flared up yesterday, and I think the hope is that by Monday or Tuesday they might be able to come up with some kind of an agreement. The problem is House Republicans, of course, don't like having to pay for big, expensive things, but you can see the TV ads now. Mm-hmm. Your Republican congressman didn't want to help to pay to, help veterans. So they realize that probably more than anything has to get solved before they leave.
It's kind of a question. I mean, this was our lead story for weeks on end, and the idea that there wasn't an easy or at least an agreed upon fix is amazing.
Doesn't that tell you what kind of period we're in, though? That it was such a huge story for a day and a half, a week and a half, or whatever, and then, boy, it got subsumed by everything else, right? The half-life of a story these days is about a quarter life or an eighth life, because we're moving from the VA to the Bergdahl case to the Ukraine crisis and back to Syria, and Iraq suddenly is about to fall, and, oh, by the way, don't forget Gaza. It's hard to keep up, and I think Congress, as well as the president, finds all this to be dizzying.
And I think the big one to watch is whether or not either of the two chambers passes something to deal with the border issue, and whether that festers through the recess. You guys are going to go home and have town hall meetings or campaign events. Will any of that outrage show up? Polling this week suggested suddenly for the first time the economy and jobs got pushed down by, of all things, immigration.
I was in Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago, and 1,500 miles away from the border, and that's all they want to talk about at this congressional town hall meeting I went to for Jim Sensenbrenner. They're outraged about it in a way that would make you think that people were knocking on their doors and taking their things. So this is not something which you could ignore once you go home. Well, there's... He said it. I love Canada.
All letters go to Ed.
All letters to Ed. Thank you, everybody. If you have more questions, join me this Thursday, July 31st at noon for my monthly web chat, and I'll try to come up with a few answers. And then we'll see you next time on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.